that's rock and roll of a kind. It's our rock and roll, it's our interpretation through the filters of everything that we like. And when I say rock and roll, I just talk about that. I don't mean that element of nostalgia. When you say that to most people, they immediately think of, sort of a certain size of turn-ups and, kind of clothes and pink Cadillacs. And I'm not talking about rock and roll in that way. I'm talking rock and roll as sort of an energy and a main ingredient and a life force, that drives through all kinds of music that, has gone down through the decades.
It's consistent, but it's too persistent.
Well, you can go right back before the war and sort of hear it from before then. But the obvious ones, you got the from the 50s when rock and roll kicked in. People like Little Richard, Jerry Lee. Once you got a drummer, Elvis was rock and roll. I think Elvis was kind of more rockabilly sounding before. But then you got the 60s and some of the British invasion groups had it. They had that same energy to them. And then in the later 60s, the counterculture bands, MC5, the Stooges, that kind of thing, Hendrix, Blue Cheer and all that. And then you got into the sort of 70s, bands like AC/DC, Motorhead, those kind of bands. You can hear that same intensity within what they're doing, and you can almost follow that trail of breadcrumbs back, And then the later 70s, there was the punk explosion, sort of the New York side first, and then over to England, and then bounced across to the west coast of America for the hardcore scene. And through bands like today, people like Jack White, have it. I think Queens of Stone Age, that kind of thing. You can hear it if you look for it. It's that same. You recognise that same kind of spark. It seems to be born out of the same energy. It was amazing. It was like quite an interesting story that a DJ here in London was interviewing Jack White on the radio for Six Music. Steve Lamacq was interviewing him, and he played him a track of ours, and he said, "Listen to this band. You really should get these guys to play with you next time you're in town." And so when he was next here on tour with the Dead Weather, we were contacted by him. Would you like to do a show? And we all agreed, yeah, we definitely want to do it. But we were in France. Where were we when we?
We were in Strasbourg.
And we did the show in Strasbourg, and then we drove all the way through the night. We stopped for a couple of hours just so the driver could sleep for a few hours at about sort of 4 a.m, and then we were off again. Drove to the ferry across straight to the show at the Forum, did the show. And it was great, and he was really cool, and we chatted with him afterwards, and then we got back on our bus and drove all the way straight back to France and all the way out to Le Havre. And by the time we hit Le Havre, we were in bit, just exhausted.
This isn't in a nightliner, this is in a splitter, so it's like
hardcore
sleep deprivation.
Quid pro quo. Something fun, something random.
Our first 2 records were pretty much straight up rock and roll records, and that was great, and that was to kind of just make him as exciting as direct as possible, but we didn't want to keep repeating that, and so with this record we kind of pushed ourselves a little bit further into sort of uncharted waters, and I think it's come up, it's still a Jim Jones Revue record, it's still exciting, it's still visceral, but it's doing things slightly differently. There's no 1, 4, 5, 12 bar progressions in it. But it's still got the intensity of a Jim Jones Revue record, but it's kind of gone off on lots of different angles, and that's quite deliberate. And we were working with Jim Sklavounos again, who produced it, but he was a great help to have in the studio because he'd been working with some really kind of avant-garde esoteric acts throughout his career, and people like Sonic Youth and Nick Cave, so nothing phases him, so he was like a good guide to have through the sort of like murky waters. And then we got it mixed by Jim Abbas, which was great because he gave a whole different feel to the sound. I mean, we'd never worked with anyone like Jim before, and it was great to have his kind of, the stuff that he'd done with the Arctic Monkeys, but also the hip hop stuff we'd done with DJ Shadow. Though obviously we're not making a hip hop record, but he brought a certain element of that beat driven thing into it. And it kind of covers lots of different territory. It goes from like gospel, doo-wop, hardcore punk rock, our own twisted version of rockabilly. And another important element of it was this is the first record that Henry played on with, so he brought his feel to it, which was different from the previous player. Well, if the music industry
chop off your left arm or your right arm.
If the music industry continues as it is, we won't have any choice. We'll just have to keep playing live. Do you know what I mean? Because no one gets paid for doing records anymore, so we might not have a choice in that. But the thing that's interesting about this record, seriously, is that, you know, we've been a live band up until this record, but it was really, really good fun, and it was a really kind of exciting creative process to go in the studio and actually explore ideas instead of just going hammering it out and playing what we do live. So, this record's worked the other way around, where the ideas not necessarily conceived in the studio, but they were conceived more conceptually and then expanded upon in the studio. We then had to learn to play them live, whereas it used to be the other way around. We'd have our live set, which we'd then just record. So, you know, I think it's been a really, really good process, this album, and just like finding different areas where the band is, you know, where it's going and exploring it. Yeah, definitely, absolutely.
Something else that's interesting is we wrote some songs actually in the studio as well, or took some half done ideas in and worked on them in the studio.
We've never done that before.
Yeah. On the new album, there's a real good variety. There's some songs that we were already playing live. There's some songs that they were fully formed ideas, and there were some songs that came just from a guitar riff. There were songs that came from an idea we started to do and we couldn't quite get it, but it took us somewhere else and we went with it, and that became a song. And like Henley was saying, there's some stuff that we actually wrote in the studio itself. So you've got like the full gamut of different approaches to writing on the record for us.